Jim Montgomery rebounded pretty quick and found stability with the St. Louis Blues after being fired by the Bruins. 1 year later, though, the Bruins appear to have a foundational relationship that is built for the future.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. On today's episode, we are going to discuss the return of Jim Montgomery to TD Garden for the first time after being fired and subsequently and quickly hired by the St. Louis Blues. We'll take a look at where he and the Bruins organization have gone since that parting of ways and who is in a better spot. We'll also do our weekly Bruins barometer, whether we are holding, buying, or selling based on recent results and the state of the roster. And we will also preview tonight's game against the St. Louis Blues. Again, my name is Ian McLaren. I am the host of Locked On Boston Bruins. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I have been covering this team and the NHL for various major outlets for 20 years now. All right, so it's been about a year since Jim Montgomery was fired by the Boston Bruins following a pretty lackluster start to last season. He will be making his return to TD Garden for the first time since being let go. And to the St. Louis media on Wednesday, he said he was kind of experiencing a bag of mixed emotions. He acknowledges the good, he had some friends, the Jack Adams trophy, obviously the winningest team in NHL regular season history, and of course, some very, very disappointing times, namely losing to the Florida Panthers in the playoffs and subsequently later on being fired. He said it's natural for everybody when you go back somewhere, somebody has moved on from you, you have a little bit of extra fight inside you. And that's kind of where he is coming at with respect to this game. He has a little extra fight in him to prove the Bruins were wrong. The Blues, he's going to make sure they are ready for this one. It's going to be a high emotion game, and it's more than just 2 points for the Blues and for Montgomery. Now, really, he didn't languish too long when it came to his post-firing life. He was hired very quickly by the St. Louis Blues. 5-year contract, 5 days after being fired, cementing his high value despite the Bruins' decision and making him look pretty good while making the Bruins look pretty silly. The same thing happened before Montgomery when the Bruins fired Bruce Cassidy, who is not looking too great right now by the way he's embracing his new goaltender, but that's a conversation for a different podcast. Cassidy was fired. He was quickly snatched up by the Vegas Golden Knights, and they went on to win the Stanley Cup. For Jim Montgomery's Blues, they struggled last season with a 9-12-1 record, fired Drew Bannister, hired Jim Montgomery, and they finished strong, 35-18-7, and they made the playoffs, 5th in the Central Division. The Blues were instantly better, proving that Montgomery's system and communication work. He is the coach the Bruins thought they were firing just for a different organization. And it just, for whatever reason, wasn't working with Montgomery and the Boston Bruins anymore. He had that quick success where, again, jumped in, won the Jack Adams trophy. He had the winningest team in NHL history. You could argue maybe that anybody could have coached them, but it was his playoff record that really was held against him later on. 2 failed series against the Florida Panthers, despite beating the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round a couple of seasons ago. And then he came in, took over the Jets, led them to the playoffs, where they lost in the first round in a Game 7 to the Winnipeg Jets. They were instantly better. He was the coach. The Bruins, were questioned for letting go so early on. They handed the reins to Joe Sacco. Obviously, last season, we've talked about it at length on Locked On Boston Bruins. So many things went wrong for this team. Joe Sacco comes in, tries to stabilize things, but we can look at it now with the freshest of eyes because we are firmly in the Marco Sturm era. The Bruins' decision to fire Monty and eventually hire Sturm was not about necessarily wins and losses. It was about culture, reset, defensive structure, and long-term development. General Manager Don Sweeney, Team President Cam Neely were looking for a coach who would reestablish the Bruins' way, a core defensive identity that had eroded over time and was lost even more with the trading of Brandon Carlo, Charlie Coyle, and Brad Marchand last season. He brings discipline, structure, player development to the table after being a coach in the AHL. Right now, the Bruins under Sturm, a respectable 15-13-0 record, 30 points, 4th in the Atlantic. They're not setting records, but they don't have that stacked roster that Jim Montgomery had to work with as well. And the roster has been depleted more and more over the past couple of years. They're not setting records, but they're respectable. Playoff contender. Doing well with what they have currently. Charlie McAvoy out, David Pastrnak out. Focused on developing younger players like Fraser Minton, Marat Khusnutdinov. Alex Steves has stepped in and played very well. And Sturm has a long-term leash to navigate this transition. Well, 3 years at the very least. So it's kind of a debate right now as to who is in a better spot. You could argue Montgomery is. He's got a 5-year contract, organizational commitment. He proved the firing was short-sighted by immediately turning the Blues into a playoff team last season. And, he's where he wants to be. He was an assistant in St. Louis previously, came to Boston. They couldn't come to an agreement on a long-term contract extension, and it was believed that he wanted to be in St. Louis. That was his long-term goal, and that came to pass. You could argue the Bruins are in a better spot. They have the right coach for the future in Sturm, a hire based on long-term cultural fit, not short-term necessarily gains or wins. 15-13 record shows the organization has stabilized despite some ongoing injury issues after the messy departure and bottoming out. And Sturm has a proven track record of developing players, which is crucial for a team that is retooling. We'll look more later on at some issues facing the current Blues and whether or not, Jim Montgomery is on the hot seat is probably too early for that, but the Blues are not thriving this season like they did last year. There are some real issues going on there. The other night, Jordan Binnington was pulled and gave Montgomery some words while he was coming off the ice, not dissimilar to the incident that happened with him and Brad Marchand on the bench last season. We'll get into that later on when we preview tonight's game. But when you're talking about who won the breakup, who's in a better spot, I didn't love the firing of Jim Montgomery at the time. It was clear that he wasn't necessarily willing to come back under the Bruins terms. So he didn't lean in to negotiate a contract, kind of bet on himself, was quickly scooped up, led the Blues to the playoffs last year. But for me right now, I am so happy that Marco Sturm is the head coach of the Boston Bruins. I think he's done very well so far, taking over, transition, integrating new players into the lineup, navigating all these injuries, and he really seems like the right man for the job for this retool and hopefully bringing them back to success. Which brings us to where we're at right now on the Bruins barometer. Are we buying? Are we selling? Are we holding? We'll take a look at that here as the podcast continues. NFL Sundays move pretty fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the games start to shift. A receiver gets hurt, defense tightens up, the momentum flips after a turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props that update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and so much more. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. That's FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. Thank you so much again for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. All right, so how are we feeling about our Boston Bruins right now? They're coming off a loss to Detroit. They are decidedly beat up, and reinforcements are being recalled on the blue line after Michael Callahan, who was already an emergency recall, was injured the other night. The Bruins defense coming into this season, you had the top six as Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, Henry Jokiharju, Mason Lohrei, and Andrew Peeke. We have seen, and Jordan Harris as your seventh defenseman. The Bruins are currently without Charlie McAvoy after he took a puck to the face, had to undergo surgery. They're currently without Jordan Harris, who had to undergo ankle surgery, and they are without Henry Jokiharju currently, and now they're without Michael Callahan. So that's two regulars, their seventh defenseman, and a recall who are all out. Still healthy, you have, of course, Zadorov, Lindholm, Lohrei, Peeke, and Jonathan Aspero, who was an early season recall when Hampus Lindholm got injured. And now you are looking at recalling either Frederick Brunet or Victor Soderstrom, who was signed in the offseason. If it were up to me, you're probably going or wanting to go, righty-lefty, which would mean Soderstrom would be likely to come up because Brunet is a lefty, and you've already got Lindholm. Who else is a lefty? Zadorov, Lohrei, Aspero, technically a left-hand shot defenseman as well. Whereas Brunet can play both sides, but Soderstrom is a decidedly right-hand defenseman, and you might want to give him a look as kind of more of an established guy in his professional career, older and all that. All this to say that it's really a kind of wait-and-see time for the Bruins. And not only because of the injuries on defense, but, of course, they're without David Pastrnak. He will not play against the St. Louis Blues. He may not play against the New Jersey Devils. And then the Bruins have a pretty light week next week with only 2 games on the schedule, and both on the road. So perhaps they shut him down for the next 4 games and see where he's at, or maybe even 5 because it's a 3-game road trip. See where he's at on December 16th when they host the Utah Mammoth, have 5 games at home heading into the holiday break. They've got St. Louis coming up tonight, as well as next Tuesday. They played the Devils on Saturday, the Winnipeg Jets next Thursday. They're kind of reeling without Connor Hellebuck, injury issues of their own. Then they will go to the Wild in Minnesota on Sunday the 14th. So for me right now, I'm kind of in hold mode once again. I was veering towards buy when they were on that winning streak and everybody was looking pretty good and healthy. Charlie McAvoy was on pace for a career year. David Pastrnak, healthy, doing his thing. Morgan Geekie keeps scoring. Jeremy Swayman was unbelievable in November, kind of faltered a bit the other night. There are rumblings out there that they're interested in Kiefer Sherwood. I saw that again today from Aaron Portzline in Columbus. Sherwood's from there, and there's interest with the Columbus Blue Jackets and Kiefer Sherwood, maybe Yegor Chinakhov going the other way because he's being misused in Columbus right now as a checking winger. I'd love the Bruins to make a swing at him, to be honest. But all this to say, and of course, Connor Garland is in that conversation as well. I don't think if you're the Bruins, the way things are shaping up, you're not trading your own draft picks because the first could be pretty high. Toronto's could be fairly high because theirs is only top 5 protected and they're near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Who knows what next season will bring. Maybe you dangle that Florida pick that you got from the Brad Marchand trade in a Connor Garland deal because you know that you will be getting a fairly consistent mid-level forward with 20 goal, 50 point capabilities for the foreseeable future because he signed for 6 years. Maybe that's the buy. If they're buying, it would have to be not giving up their own picks and also investing in someone with some contract and cost control. And Garland fits that bill pretty easily. Maybe they look for reinforcements on the blue line and look at Erasmus Anderson from the Calgary Flames. But when it comes to kind of the playoff picture and where they stand, heading into Wednesday night's action, they had the 4th highest point total in the Eastern Conference, but they were in the mix with like 10 other teams, even more than that. You have the Hurricanes, Lightning, Capitals, all with 34 points. The Devils with 33, Flyers, Penguins with 31, as well as the Islanders, and then 4 teams level with the Bruins at 30. Only 4 points out of first place in the Eastern Conference, but also only 5 points from the bottom of the Eastern Conference. And if you look at point percentage, it's even more dire. They are 13th in point percentage. There's no team in the Eastern Conference below 500, I should add. The Panthers, Sabres are right there heading into Wednesday's action. Then you have the Leafs and then the Bruins, tied with the Rangers. So the Eastern Conference is pretty competitive, although pretty mediocre at the same time. It really looks like the Metropolitan Division could get 5 playoff teams. As it stands right now, they have 5 teams above 600. So you'd have to squeak into a top 3 spot in the Atlantic Division. And right now, in point percentage, the Bruins are 5th and would have to jump over the Detroit Red Wings and the Ottawa Senators. So with all these injuries, especially to David Pastrnak, hopefully he's not out long-term. We know Charlie McAvoy likely won't play again until 2026. You're relying on your 9th, 10th defenseman on the depth chart. Aspero is 8th on there. Then you had Callahan. Now you're going to have Brunet or Soderstrom. It's a tough task to stay afloat in the Eastern Conference without your top defenseman and your top player. It's not an excuse. It's just reality. All right. So right Right now, I'm holding, but we're kind of veering towards selling, and that will especially be true if David Pastrnak is out for any serious length of time. They have an opportunity to pick up 2 big points against the St. Louis Blues, and that is a game we'll preview as the podcast continues. It is so important to stay hydrated, folks, and when you are, everything just works better. Focus, energy, mood, even your skin. And that's why more people have been using Drip Drop, a doctor-developed hydration system that keeps you running at full power no matter what your day looks like. This isn't your average sports drink. Drip Drop delivers 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands using a science-backed formula trusted by medical pros, firefighters, and over 90% of top college and pro teams. Hydration is a non-negotiable. Drip Drop helps you feel sharper, calmer, and honestly just better overall. Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com, use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 20% off. Stock up now before the holidays hit. Keep your body and mind performing at their best with Drip Drop. Bruins, Blues, Thursday night at TD Garden. Jim Montgomery's return to Boston just over a year after being fired and hired by the St. Louis Blues. Now, the Blues are 3-4 over their past 10 games. They had lost 6 of 7 before reeling off wins over the Ottawa Senators, the Utah Mammoth. They're coming off a loss to the Anaheim Ducks, a game in which Jordan Binnington was yanked. He came off the ice, gave some words to Jim Montgomery, and it was addressed after the game. Apparently, they apologized to each other, talked to each other. But honestly, Joel Hofer has been better than Binnington as of late. Binnington, of course, this calendar year was a 4 Nations face-off hero for Team Canada. Hofer had a shutout against the Utah Mammoth, which is pretty impressive. And then he allowed only 1 goal on 20 shots in relief against the Ducks the other night. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Hofer in net getting the start for the Boston Bruins. It'll be interesting to see who the Bruins go with. Swayman, of course, was yanked in the game against Detroit. He saw his save percentage drop from .915 to .910, but it is so much better than Joonas Korpisalo. He did come in, played sharp in 12 minutes or so against Detroit, making 9 saves on 9 shots, but his save percentage is only 88. Slim margin on a test, say you get 88% or 91%, you're pretty happy either way, but I'll take the 91, especially in hockey when the margin for error is so low. The Blues do have some injury issues of their own at this point. They are without Jimmy Snuggerud, a very promising young player who is on injured reserve. Alex Torpchenko also out. He's a pretty fine depth player that I'm familiar with because he played with the Guelph Storm. They still have a boatload of talent, though. Their last 5 games are led in scoring by Robert Thomas. He's got 4 points, 2 goals from Jordan Kyrou, 3 assists from Philip Broberg. They're led in scoring by Thomas and Kyrou, although they're not really setting the world on fire. 17 points in 23 games for Thomas, 15 points in 26 games for Kyrou. On the blue line, Justin Falk with 13 points in 27 games. The Bruins, Morgan Geekie leading the way. He's got 6 points, 4 goals in the past 5 games. And Elias Lindholm has 4 points since his return to the lineup just a few games ago. So the first of 2 meetings between these 2 teams. The Blues are 9-11-7. The Bruins 15-13. They'll play again just in a few days, December 9th. So there could be some residual heat from whatever happens in this one. The Blues, stop me if you have heard this from last year. Their special teams, not great. Their power play is 17th. Their penalty kill is 26th. That was one of the reasons why Monty was let go last year, is because the penalty kill and the power play were both abysmal, and that leads to poor results on the ice. It's been a big turnaround this season. The power play is 6th under assistant coach Steve Spott. The penalty kill ranked 8th. In terms of goals for and against per game, the Blues are averaging only 2.56 goals per game, 30th. So maybe it's a good time to put Korpisalo out there, give Swayman a bit of rest before a big game against New Jersey. The Bruins averaging 3.04 goals per game, which is ranked 16th. So 16th for the Bruins, middle of the pack, 30th for the Blues. The Blues are also allowing 3.44 goals per game, which ranks 27th, and 3.25 goals allowed per game for the Bruins, which is 23rd. You look at the Blues numbers right now, and they're very reminiscent of Boston this time last year. Pretty bad special teams, not scoring, giving up a boatload of goals, and this is a game the Bruins could and should win because of just the state of the St. Louis Blues at the moment. They are just not very good. I saw some betting odds the other day with Jim Montgomery listed as one of the coaches to be fired first. I don't think it's that bad, but they are one of only a few teams in the NHL below 500. They have the 4th worst point percentage in the NHL at .463. Only Vancouver, Nashville, and Calgary are worse. And their goal differential is currently minus 26, which is worst in the NHL. So the Bruins need to, say this every night, stay out of the penalty box. Play smart, especially with defensive call-ups on the blue line to fill in for McAvoy, Callahan, Yoki Haru. Just play smart, keep it simple, stay out of the penalty box. If Jordan Binnington's in net, then try to rattle him, get under his skin. You know he'll do something stupid at some point. And, just don't let Montgomery's motivation on his team get the better of you, that emotion. I mean, we could see a tribute video. I don't think he'll be in tears like Marshy was when he had his, but they should acknowledge him for the success he had. But I also, again, like I said off the top, do think the Bruins are in a better spot now under Marco Sturm than they were under Jim Montgomery moving forward, long-term future and all that. All right, thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins your first listen once again today. Please do subscribe on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube if you have not done so already. You can follow on socials at Locked NHL Bruins. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL Game Night podcast. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Local analysis on a national scale. You can find it on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll be back tomorrow to bring you all the stats, storylines, and significance of the game against the St. Louis Blues. We will also take a look at Saturday's game against the Devils and bring you all the latest on the Boston Bruins. That's what we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you again here next time.